My emotions! My emotions!
Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I am going to be talking about Wrath by John Gwynne, the final book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And man, what a ride this series has been. So I started finally, and this was, I do have to give 100% credit to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, because he's the one who talked me into bumping this up. This was a series I had meant to get to at some point, but it was not particularly high on my list just because I'd heard some mixed things about the first book, Malice, and my TBR is always awful, so it took me a while to get to. But I finally did decide to check it out. He recommended it so highly. I read Malice, and I'm like, this was okay. It was a solid book. It was 3 stars. I liked it, but it was pretty tropey. It just kind of seemed like there was a ton of setup, and everyone's like, oh, it's a setup book. It gets so much better. And then I get to the point where I read Valor, and I'm like, holy crap, everyone was absolutely right. Because Valor just went bam, and then Ruin took it even further, and Wrath kept it going 100%. Ruin and Wrath, both 5-star books for me. I went like 3, 4, 5, 5. Ruin and Wrath, absolutely both 5-star books. So much. I feel like, in some ways, I feel like Ruin rated technically a little bit higher if I'm looking at it like objectively. In my opinion, I think Ruin was the slightly better book. But I don't think I've ever read a book nearly as fast as I read Wrath. I finished that book way too quickly for the page count that it was. I just couldn't put the book down, and it really, really was fantastic. So, this will be a spoiler review. I will be talking details about Wrath, and I'm not going to be watching what I say about any of the prior books, because this is the last book in the series. So, if you continue on from this point, be aware that the whole series could be spoiled for you. So, really, I do have spoiler-free reviews for like the first 2. I do have a spoiler review for Ruin. You could check those ones out if you've not gotten to this point. But don't watch this video at this point if you have not read Wrath. So, we pick up pretty much right where we left off with Ruin, which Ruin ended with like the death of Storm. I was really happy that that was a fake out, but like I believed it at the time. I'm like, oh my gosh. Because everybody talked about how the ending of Ruin was so terrible and would like ruin you, and seeing Storm die, and I'm like, oh no. And then I did pretty much immediately start Ruin though, and so I found out that Storm was still alive pretty quickly. And normally that's the kind of thing, something that Gwynne has done such a fantastic job is just being so good and not overusing either both deaths or people almost dying. So when you get fake out deaths, or you get situations where the characters are in danger, you always believe that they're in danger, and you always believe that if it appears somebody has died, that they did. Sometimes people survive, which is, it is realistic, you not everyone who gets stabbed is going to die, but he does this for both the heroes and the villains, the good guys, the bad guys, in such a varying way that you never know if your villain is really dead, you never know if your hero is really dead, and it's done probably a little bit more than I would normally be okay with, but because it's done so well, I don't really mind. And we get Corlin and Gar and Dath and Kulla, I think, all going after Corbin, who was captured by the Jotun. And I was just waiting. It sort of happened. It didn't happen the same way I pictured it, but pretty early on, I was messaging Andrew, and I'm just like, I have this just image in my head of like Corbin riding up, holding a sword up, triumphant, leading a pack of Jotun on riding bears, and I didn't quite get that. I did get them showing up to the battle a little bit late at the very end, but I was pretty excited there. But Corbin is a character who I did not care for in Malice, when he was just set up as the typical kind of chosen one trope. And his growth, even though he's still not really one of my favorite characters, that doesn't say anything negative about him. That's just something really positive about my favorite characters, because I just, like Macon and Camlin, I loved so much. Gar was a great character. There were so many great characters in there, and I gravitated more toward the older characters than the younger characters. But Corbin went through so much growth. A lot of the characters did, but we really got such a different shade of Corbin as he learned to be the chosen one and the leader, even though he didn't really want to. And I love the way that he just tried to apply, you know, doing what was right, truth and courage, trying to just put that in and find a way to make it work. And then he finds out at the end of the third book that it's all bull. Like, none of the prophecy, none of it's real. And I talked about that a bit in the Ruin video, but he finds out that it's not real, and it just kind of like crushes him. He never asked to be the chosen one, but how is he supposed to react when all these people believe in him and he finds out that he's not? And so that's when he goes off and gets captured. And his interactions with the giants, where he just kind of can find common ground with anybody, and everybody believing him to really be this chosen one just because he's such a friendly, kind, and caring person. And that definitely seems to be the way it is. It's, even though he's not technically special, he has this knack, even before he realizes it, for just making friends with people and finding a way to you know, be kind, be peaceful to people, and all of it throughout, which I think is a great look at it as well. With his rescue, we do get just the fantastic scene of him telling his friends, including Gar, who has followed basically his whole life, followed this prophecy and believed it to be true, telling them it's not true. Michael told them it's not true, and obviously a struggle, but just the, of course we're with you. It doesn't really matter if, you know, you're not the chosen one. We're following you for you. And it's all of that, I think, even though it does, you know, you still get some of the tropes, but just the found family here is so real, and it feels so real. And with this, the same thing too with like Gar, who the younger people are trying to like sneak out to go get Corbin, and Gar is just ready to go too. And they're like, I thought you had to sing. He's like, you think I'm really not gonna go and get Corbin? No. And it's just, so much of it was fantastic. And then you have them getting attacked by the Jotun, and you do have probably, it was one of the biggest here comes the cavalry type moments in the entire series. I didn't even care. It was amazing. I was going nuts when I read this. I was just like so hyped because Storm, after like being nursed to hell, comes, just jumps out and just starts tearing stuff up. And oh, it was so great. And honestly, like, I thought a lot of the characters were potentially dead because there were all these injuries, and you don't know, because in the sequence of battle, you never really know until the end if anybody's going to come out alive or dead, or how grievously they're going to be injured. And for the most part, it worked out fine at that particular time, but just Storm jumping out was amazing. And you do get a ton of deaths. In the series in general, and this book was certainly no exception, and I do also love the way that Gwynne balances deaths of characters you like with characters that you don't. I loved that we got to see Jail die, for example. That's one I've been waiting for a while, but it doesn't just necessarily happen super easily, and there are some other characters, like, you know, Rafe, for example, who stick around all the way until the end, and finally do get to die as well. But you get a lot of deaths that hurt as well from the good guys, and there were a lot, like I said, but some of them in general. With for one, seeing Fidel, the standoff with Macon and Lycos and Fidel, where you really do get the bits there with the standoff, and you know, you have the bad guy, and it feels exactly like the bad guy, like, you know, you have to kill yourself, you have to walk away, or I'm going to kill her, you know, even though the villain doesn't really plan on it, and Fidel jumping, stopping it anyway, and then Macon still getting captured, basically, and attacked, and then he ends up, you know, doesn't stay captured, but Lycos ends up getting away, of course, with the Starstone Torque that they came for, and it's just, there's so many of these villain moments where they do that, or the, like, you know, the bad guys, the asking for mercy, and the good guys like, okay, fine, and then they turn on him. There's a lot of these moments, but they're turned a little bit on their head to an extent, like that one with Fidel actually dying. Usually a lot of the good guys do end up getting to actually, you know, kill the people they're trying to kill, but with that's along the way. Macon, for example, which, oh my god, the death of Lycos was fantastic with, like, the freaking ants and stuff. Love that. But Macon still dies. And Macon, I kind of feel like, had to die. He was my favorite character, I think, was Macon. I really enjoyed his storyline and just him in general. And he was someone who was never going to be at peace. And just that, even though he died, having that kind of like him seeing Fidel and him seeing Castle and like feeling like he's going to the other side to finally be at peace was wonderful. And so that was a really great one that I enjoyed. The big thing that really hit me the hardest, I feel like, though, was Gar. And you already had his father, Tugel, die in the last one, but Gar, who you think is dead in general, and you're like, oh my gosh, Gar. But then him, like, basically, like, dying, crawling over to Corbin, telling him he's proud of him and that he loves him, and, you know, and just Corbin, who was basically dead himself until coming back, which, once again, didn't even bother me because it happened in a creative way, and I wanted them to survive. Gar is still dying, though. That was rough, just that time there, and just Corbin in general, who survives but has to deal with so many of the people that he loves, including his parents, Gar, who was like his best friend slash father figure slash brother, you know, all of these different people that were close to him. He still has to deal with them dying. He doesn't just, you know, good prevails, kinda. But as we found out in Ruin, and as I had some suspicions, good and evil was a little bit definitely more gray than that. You did have this is a very, very good versus evil, dark versus light type story, but with a lot of originality in there, which is something that I loved. I love the idea of the fake prophecy of the good, evil champions, that none of that really mattered, but it was just trying to basically force something predictable. You do get Azeroth does technically win because all of the treasures are brought together, the portal comes through, and then Azeroth comes in with Kadashim. And that, while this is still a 5-star book for me, that was the most disappointing and underwhelming thing from the entire series for me. Is Azeroth kind of comes through, he's just a regular Kadashim. The Kadashim are in the flesh now, so they can die and are actually like easier to kill than the possessed Jahar that had the spirits of Kadashim. And like their entire fighting style where like they just would pick people up and drop them, like why didn't you just train like the giant bats to do that at that point? I mean, like that's all they're doing is something that like a flying creature with no real like intelligence could do, pick up and dropping. I mean, it's pretty underwhelming. They didn't do a ton of fighting in the battle, and then Azeroth kind of like the fight between Corbin and Azeroth was pretty cool, but it's just like that whole part felt very underwhelming with the actual action sequences up to that point, and immediately after that kind of plotline gets resolved, still fantastic and amazing. But that did just kind of feel a little flat from like your big evil villain. But it once again I think plays into the fact that even though this is like the big bad, the whole idea of these titanic forces of good and evil was a flawed idea to begin with. They are creatures, albeit technically powerful creatures, even though they seem to die pretty easily. But they're still creatures, and coming into the world of flesh, there's only so much that they can do. And you find out that in general, despite the fact that Azeroth, his plan was to bring the Kadashim to wipe out Earth, apparently the Ben Elam, they wanted to bring a portal to Earth so that they could come to Earth instead, allegedly to protect. But that's where I wonder, especially since I know there's some follow-up as well, what we're going to see in the future, how that really works out with the Ben Elam. And we do get a lot of the Kadashim killed, a lot of Ben Elam killed, but still some kind of left. And I especially love the ending of Corbin being like, nah, I know the truth. I know I'm not the bright star. I'm just a guy. I'm going to go do what I think is best, and I'm going to go do something that I think will honor the people that I lost in your war. You do your thing. I'll do mine. Also, it didn't come off as like, because you do get sometimes like the reluctant hero, which Corbin was, but like he was the best kind. He never asked for it, but he did his best because he knew people were counting on them. At the end, too, when he finds out he's not the real hero at all, it was all made up. He knows there's people counting on him, so he really doesn't act any differently. But he just knows he's not going to be a pawn, and he's going to do what he thinks is right, which is basically what he's always done. So I loved the character path, the character choices. Just really did a great job with all of that as well. You get to see some characters kind of pair up. A lot of the characters that pair up did not have things go super well. with like Farrell and Leif dying, and Corlin and Corbin ended up making it, so there was at least that that happened as well. But several of the others didn't do very well, especially like being in a relationship with one of the main characters ended really badly for most people, but we did have some main characters die as well. But this series, it just had such a classic feel. It really got me in the mood for that. Like, I'm rooting for the good guys. I was willing to let go of some of the things that were like maybe a little bit convenient because the story was just told so damn well. I didn't care. I was just happy to keep going with it, to see it, and still you get that very, like I said, very bittersweet ending with Gwynne. And I think that's the balance is what's done so well. It's a very classic dark versus light type story, but there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of darker themes, there's a lot of twists and things that really balance that out. So you're not just getting your sword and sorcery, predictable trope-filled fest. You get those things, but then you have so much out there to balance it that you can actually go back and use some of these things, and it's okay because you're not overdoing it. You can kill off characters, but also have characters who survive just barely through whatever reason because you've done enough. There's enough balance that it works. It's not like, oh, we know the characters aren't going to die. 'Cause no, like, they straight up will. Like, characters will die in Faithful and the Fallen, and you know that, and you learn that very early on. Like, even book 1, a main POV character is killed off, and you follow Macon instead of Castle. So that's set very early that you do feel the danger, even though some of the characters make it out alive, and you really never know for sure. So it's just, there's so much balance here with these 4 books. And besides Malice, which took some time to get set up, I did appreciate, too, there were a lot of things that came back, like the running mount that was learned as a part of the warrior trials, whatever they were called. I'm forgetting at this point. For Corbin, just some other things like that, all of the little touches, the pieces, different parts going back to places they saw in the first book for the treasures. So much, like the setup all came back, and it was showed to all be completely relevant and needed. That's what I want to see. Like, if I reread Malice at this point, I'd be like, oh, I see exactly why they did all of this. And it would make sense. That's what you want. There was nothing that was wasted, even though at the time I'm like, kind of like, this is starting a little slow. It all served a purpose, and it just weaved together very well. And I also think the 4 books worked out pretty well, too. Because as I commented, especially with Valor, like, I wanted more. Like, I could have read these books. These books could have all been, like, had an extra 300 pages, and I would have been happy. I like the nice long. I would have liked it a little bit more, like, fleshed out, just with even, like, the prose. Everything moves very, very fast. When I got to Ruin and Wrath, I read that basically as 1 book. I mean, it was a total of, oh, heck, how many pages even is that? For those 2, it was like, I'm going to say around 1,600 pages, which is probably right about there. So, like, between 15 and 1,600 pages. So, like, that's a pretty long book, but I mean, the breakneck speed there just kept me going and going and going. So I looked at that as almost 1 book. And honestly, Valor and Ruin kind of worked like that too. All of the books were really started off right after the next one. So I mean, this could have easily been a longer series, and I probably would have still enjoyed it. But it was nice that I could also get through and still get so much out of it, even with that pacing. So just really an A+ to John Gwynne here. After finishing Faithful and the Fallen, I do prefer this to the Bloodsworn saga so far with Shadow of the Gods. I do think Shadow of the Gods was John Gwynne kind of at his best so far with the way that he's writing, because his prose was good to begin with. I feel like improved the way he describes characters and kind of paces and with the POVs. I feel like it was a more simplified but strengthened look he took there, but Faithful and the Fallen just has that classic epic, exactly what I'm looking for. Definitely a series that has found its way into the halls of my favorite of all time. Definitely a series I will most certainly reread, because even knowing what's going to happen, it's written so well, you have the reread value in general, and all the things that tie back from the earlier books. So really just a fantastic, knew it was going to be a 5 stars. There was never a doubt. Even with, like I said, the whole part with Azeroth, normally that would have bothered me so much more. I'm like, this is kind of lame. But then we get to the ending, and I'm like, this is just back to being fantastic. So it was enough that it didn't really bother me at all. So that said, those are my thoughts on Wrath and kind of the Faithful and the Fallen in general, because I definitely talked about that a bit. Let me know your thoughts, of course, in the comments down below, and if you want to chat Faithful and the Fallen, John Gwynne, or any other authors and books, check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord. We did have quite a few people that were reading through this at the time that I'm recording this, so I know hopefully by the time this goes out, the rest will be able to watch this, because I know I posted my Ruin and several others who were still reading it hadn't gotten there yet, but hopefully you'll be able to see it by that time. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, and if you'd like to see more of my content, then make sure to subscribe.